Looking back at my high school, college, and young professional experiences, there are always lessons that I've learned along the way that I just wish I knew earlier. Especially in college, I was being given 500-page reading assignments. Joking, but actually maybe not. That I wish I knew these 3 quick, easy reading tips that could have cut the time I spent on those reading assignments in half or more. Hey everyone, Virgil on the Cut here, back at it with another simple tip to kickstart your sustainable productivity practice. Now, even though we live in a world where you can get your information from videos and podcasts and all sorts of media that are on the rise, the ability to read quickly and efficiently can still give you a huge advantage either at work, school, or even in your own development. When I first started college, I thought my reading skills were pretty solid, but if I just put into practice these 3 exercises we're about to talk about in this video earlier in my college career, I feel like my college experience would have been much smoother. So in this video, I'll explain some of the struggles I had reading effectively, 3 simple exercises that propelled me to cut my reading time in half, and of course, I'll share some tips and tricks so that you can build this into your own speed reading practice. I attended a pretty intense college, and like lots of college students, I was often overwhelmed by the sheer amount of reading that I had to do for certain classes every single week. All right, everybody, great class and great discussion, everyone. For Friday's class, here are the readings for next week. Please read chapters 1, 2, 3, 4 through 7, and 8. Now, at the time, I had 2 basic options. The first option was if I had a ton of time and I was way ahead in my classes, I could actually read every single page, every single word of my assignments, and feel really good going into the next class. Of course, that didn't happen too often, and in terms of being able to carve out that space week after week with all these different priorities coming up, sometimes it was hard just to be able to do the full reading every single week. More often than I'd like to admit, I probably did the second option a little bit more, which was to read the first page of your assignment, read the last couple pages of your assignment, and then kind of fake it until you make it during class discussions where you just kind of affirm and repeat what everyone else is saying in class. Yeah, that was a great point, Tom. I really agree with all the points you said, especially the point about the main character and what had happened to him. Good points. You know, I was gonna say the same thing. You beat me to it, but I'm glad we both agree. Good points, Tom. Anyway, it actually wasn't until a few years after graduating that someone introduced me to an individual known as Jim Kwik. For those of you who are unfamiliar with who Jim is, he's an individual that is passionate about helping people unlock the full potential of their minds through healthy living, healthy thinking, speed reading, all of the above. And so he's definitely someone I suggest checking out. He actually just came out with this book called Limitless that came out last year, so I definitely recommend reading that book or checking it out if you're interested in learning more. My first intro to Jim Kwik was actually through his reading course, where he talks a lot about developing speed reading exercises, developing comprehension, and a number of different techniques that you can use to actually build up how fast you can read material. While Jim Kwik has a ton of helpful resources across his podcasts, books, websites, courses, and more that can help you with your speed reading and comprehension, I'm just going to focus on 3 simple exercises that I picked up from Jim Kwik. The amazing thing about these 3 simple tips are not only that 1, each of these tips were super easy to implement and start building into my speed reading training, but 2, these 3 exercises alone actually doubled or in some cases tripled my reading speed, cutting the time it took me to complete reading assignments and other things I need now even for work in half. The first easy tip that I picked up from Jim Kwik to speed up my reading is the use of what we call a visual pacer. Now, a visual pacer is just a fancy word for your finger, your pencil, a pen, a highlighter, a stylus, anything that you use to trace the words on a page and let it guide your eyes. How you use a visual pacer is pretty simple. Just trace the words you are reading with your finger and follow that finger with your eyes. Done. I honestly thought using a visual pacer was one of the silliest things that you could think of when I first started. But over the course of a week, I noticed that just using a visual pacer, just using my finger to trace the words so that my eyes could follow, actually helped me amazingly within a week. I saw huge improvements, and one of the biggest benefits that I got from using a visual pacer was I started backtracking less. Now, what backtracking is, if you haven't experienced it, although you probably have, it usually happens when you're reading a really dense piece of text or a textbook. Backtracking is when you read a sentence and literally those words don't register in your brain, so you have to go back and reread the same thing over and over and over again. using a visual pacer cuts down on the amount of times that you actually backtrack. So the more I used this visual pacer, the less I actually found myself doing that backtracking and rereading text over and over and over again. I think out of all 3 tips I'm going to talk about today, using a visual pacer is probably the easiest to implement, and you can start doing it right away. The second quick reading tip actually deals with how to decrease the amount of times or how dependent you are on subvocalization. Now, sometimes when I'm reading, I'll actually read aloud the words in my head. Sometimes I'll even use like different voices just to make things more interesting while I read. But that reading aloud of the words, almost as if you were just saying the words aloud in your head while you're reading with your eyes on the page, that's what subvocalization is. Unfortunately, as entertaining as it can be, subvocalization can actually slow you down tremendously when you're trying to read something efficiently. Now, on this point, I actually do want to add a personal note. I don't think subvocalization is always a bad thing. I think it can make things entertaining, and depending on what you're reading, it can make the material more engaging, but I do think it's important to learn how to not be dependent on subvocalization when you read, so that you can learn to read things efficiently and quicker depending on the situation. Jim Kwik's exercise to train out of subvocalization actually is a little bit like rubbing your tummy and patting your head at the same time, but I did find out that once you master this challenge, you will get a huge boost out of being able to read things a lot faster. Essentially, the exercise combines what you already did with visual pacing, that is, using your finger to move across left to right when you're reading a book, but at the same time, as you're reading each line, you're counting aloud in your head 1, 2, 3, over and over and over again. I personally found that actually saying the numbers out loud helped a lot, but by saying 1, 2, 3 while you're moving your finger across left to right on the page, it actually pushes you to stop thinking about saying the words out loud and focuses your eyes on reading visually what the material and what the text is in front of you. Here's a quick example on how to decrease subvocalization using this exercise. I'm going to move my finger across the words and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3 out loud. That 1, 2, 3, that counting is what you'll actually be saying in your head instead of reading the words on the page. So I'm going to do this real quick. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Again, this exercise does take a little bit of practice and does take some getting used to, but over time, you start getting more comfortable counting to 3 in your head, almost to the point where you actually will stop needing the numbers and stop needing to count 1, 2, and 3 as you're using your visual pacer, and you'll be able to turn off that subvocalization at will. Speed reps. The last of these 3 exercises is actually a really great way to incorporate what you're learning with the visual pacing and your subvocalization exercises to stop that subvocalization in one easy exercise that takes less than 10 minutes. This exercise, when you do it repeatedly over the course of several weeks or months, can actually give you a really great way to train up how fast you can read a piece of text. So the first thing you're gonna do is pick a book. Maybe it's something you're already reading, maybe it's something that's on your reading list, or an article that will probably take longer than 4 or 5 minutes to read, and set a timer for 4 minutes. Mark visually in the book or in the article the point at which you are going to start reading, and once that timer goes off for 4 minutes, start reading as comfortably as you can for the next 4 minutes. As I mentioned earlier, I personally found this really helpful if you could also practice the visual pacing and your subvocalization exercise to limit that subvocalization at the same time as you're reading during these 4 minutes. Once that 4-minute timer hits 0, mark where you've actually stopped reading in the book, either visually or make a mental note. Then go back to the beginning starting point and reset the timer, but instead of setting the timer for 4 minutes, you're actually gonna set the timer for 3 minutes. Once that 3-minute timer goes off, you now have that 3 minutes to read the same text that you read during the 4 minutes, but now you have 1 minute less to read it. In other words, you're gonna read the same passage you just read in 3 minutes instead of 4 minutes. Your goal in that 3-minute period is to reach the same ending point that you had when you had 4 minutes to read comfortably. Once you've accomplished that, you're gonna actually go back to the beginning again, and this time instead of 3 minutes, you're gonna set the timer for 2 minutes and repeat the same exercise. The last step of this is just along those same lines. You're gonna go back to the beginning, and instead of 2 minutes, set the timer for 1 minute. And in that 1 minute, you have to read everything that you read in that first 4-minute round, but now you have only a quarter of the amount of time that you originally had to do it. If you're like me, you'll probably have to skip a line or several lines or even full paragraphs to meet the same ending point when you start shortening the time to 2 minutes or 1 minute. That's completely normal. The benefit from doing this activity though is you're constantly pushing yourself to read faster and faster, and you actually get to work on a little bit of reading comprehension. You're reading the same material over and over and over again 4 times. The best part about this exercise, as I mentioned before, is that it only takes 10 minutes out of your day. As I mentioned before, I strongly recommend checking out Jim Kwik if you aren't familiar with him. He has a great, amazing life story and tons of resources for self-improvement. These 3 tips just happen to be some of my favorites. And of course, here are some ways that you can actually build it into your own practice and ways that I've found to be really helpful. The first tip I have in order to build this speed training practice into your daily routines is to schedule it. Think about speed reading like a muscle. If you're going to the gym regularly, you're probably able to lift the weight that you want to lift and run at faster and faster speeds because you're continually maintaining and improving your performance over time. The same thing goes for speed reading. What worked personally best for me is actually carving out 10 minutes a day for 2 to 3 weeks to practice some of these techniques, whether that's visual pacing, whether it's how to decrease subvocalization, or whether it's that speed rep exercise. And maybe it was a combination of all 3 sometimes. But having those 2 to 3 weeks in a row really gave me the boost I needed to improve consistently. Of course, if you don't have the luxury of having that time every single day for 10 minutes, I definitely suggest scheduling in at least 2 to 3 times a week these training sessions to help give you that boost over time. The second piece of advice I have is, although we're talking about improving your max speed, just keep in mind that you don't always have to read at the fastest speed that you can. We read material for different reasons, whether it's out of just personal interest, whether it's to learn something, whether it's to feel emotions. Especially if you're reading a more technical book that requires a deeper level of understanding, you're probably not going to be reading at max speed. And so a better way to think about improving your max speed is not just thinking about the highest speed that you can get to, but thinking about expanding your range and learning how to use that range of speed reading appropriately based on what text you're reading. So you have the power to be able to read very, very quickly if you want to, but you can adjust that speed based on what works best for you depending on what material you have to tackle. The last piece of advice I have is a little bit cliche, but I think it's super important, and that is to write down the reason why speed reading and learning how to develop your reading speed is important to you. Maybe it's to be able to knock out assignments faster. Maybe it's to be able to learn things at a quicker speed. Maybe it's just to have more free time to do things that aren't reading. Whatever those reasons are, write them down. Why it's important to write down the reasons that you want to learn how to speed read is we tend to remember things when it actually matters to us, when we understand and care about why we are learning the things we are learning, when we understand what's at stake if we don't learn those things. So write those reasons down, maybe on a sticky note, maybe in a bookmark, maybe somewhere on a note on your phone, so that every time that you read, you are reminded that, hey, I'm putting in these exercises into practice to develop my own speed reading for your own personal reasons. And that's all for today. Again, huge shout out to Jim Kwik for providing these exercises. But let me know how they work out for you in the comments below. Did you find them helpful? Did you find them not as helpful as you thought they would be? What other tips or tricks are you trying to help improve your speed reading practice? Let me know. As always, if you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, always hit that bell over there. But thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.